In the over 300 pages of Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden, an adventure focused on isolation, survival, and horror, there are only 2 pages that focus on any of that. But have no fear, because I created an over 30-page PDF with over 54 homebrews in it that you can pick and choose from to add to your Icewind Dale campaign. Let's roll it. Welcome to the Dungeon Coach. I'm the Dungeon Coach. I'm going to help you lower that DC in your game with the single biggest homebrew project that I've ever done. There is no way I could go over all 50 plus of these homebrews in one video. So I'll let you guys vote, and the vote was really split. So I'm going to give you guys a taste of each one of these Icewind Dale homebrew categories. We're going to start things off with my brand new cold system that gets across that frigid feeling of Rime of the Frostmaiden, because the current rules as written really don't do that. Then we're going to go into the survival part of this whole thing with some death homebrews, and everybody's been asking me for this, but how I would handle avalanches. Then we're going to come full circle. I'm going to give you guys a sneak peek of one of my horror homebrews that I've adapted for Dungeons & Dragons. It's called the
Dice Tower of Doom.
And stick around to the end, because I'm going to give you guys a sneak peek of everything in this PDF and get your mind going on the possibilities you could use this for and see if you want to pick it up for yourself. So let's get in. Time out. The sponsor of today's video is you guys. Now, I know that might sound cheesy, but for real, I never thought I would be at 9,000 subscribers in less than a year. So I came up with a gift for all my subscribers. I have spent the last 3 weeks of my life homebrewing the crap out of Icewind Dale. So if you guys want to take your game to the next level with outside of the box creative homebrew ideas, then hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out, because you might have just missed out on this. I want to thank everyone that jumps on my videos right when they release, hit that like button and drop a comment, because all those things only take a matter of seconds, but it makes a huge difference. So I wanted to say thank you by giving away hundreds of this Icewind Dale homebrew PDF. And this won't be the only time that I do something like this. And I just thought it was the best way I could possibly say thank you to my most dedicated subscribers. So again, thank you. So now, let's get into it. So starting things off in Icewind Dale, if you turn to page 10 and 11, those are the 2 pages for wilderness survival. You got avalanches, which we'll get to here in a second. But for extreme cold, this is what rules as written says. A creature exposed to the cold must succeed on a DC 10 Constitution saving throw at the end of every hour to gain 1 level of exhaustion. But don't worry, it's not that bad, because creatures with resistance or immunity to cold damage automatically succeed, as well as people who wear cold weather clothing. So you're telling me Icewind Dale is the coldest thing that they've ever released, and if you put on a really thick jacket, you're okay. That feels really bad to me. And as far as gameplay goes, it sounds awful to ask my players every hour for a DC 10 Constitution saving throw. 1, a DC 10 doesn't really feel that intimidating, and 2, every hour sounds like an awfully repetitive thing to keep asking for. So my first Icewind Dale homebrew solution is a frost check. Instead of making a Constitution saving throw every time, you make a frost check, which is based on your Constitution saving throw, but you can add more stuff to it that we'll talk about here in a second. Anytime you're exposed to cold in one quick instance or over a long duration of time, you make a frost check. A quick example would be if you fall in the frigid water or you get buried by an avalanche. Or for the long-term effects, if you are outside of a town, traveling out in the wilderness, every night at midnight, you make a frost check. This solves that problem from having to ask a check every single hour, because if I ask you for a frost check, you better bundle up, because it's coming. But now what about the intensity of this cold? It doesn't make sense to me that it's always just a DC 10 because it's always just that cold. It feels like it should be way colder. So here's my chart, which does have a DC 10, but that's just where it starts. At 0 degrees, it's cold, but every 20 degrees that drops, that DC increases by 5, getting colder and colder. You go from frigid all the way to deadly cold, and as that temperature drops, that DC increases to pretty high. But coach, you can't do a DC 30 Constitution saving throw? Well, you're right, because it gets worse. This is Icewind Dale, you know. Rime of the Frostmaiden don't mess around. For every environmental effect that would drop that temperature or make it even worse, you add 5 on top of that DC. If you have frigid cold winds, you fall into icy water and now you're wet. If it's nighttime, all of those things are going to make it even colder. Now, as the DM, you are the weather, so you are in control of where this base is and what things you throw at them. So don't go too crazy on your party, especially out the gate. Now, this kind of gets into the survival homebrew, but how do you survive these things? I'm going to give you guys a sneak peek of my cold weather gear. In order to combat the cold that has a DC that keeps on rising, you're going to be able to equip cold frost check gear to be able to increase your frost check modifier. So in my Icewind Dale, if you wear cold weather clothing, that's good. That's a good idea, but you're not immune to frost checks. That sounds crazy. Now you're maybe seeing why I didn't make this a Constitution saving throw. With it being a frost check, I can have a lot of different gear and little items, consumable items, that can give you a temporary or permanent modifier to increase that frost check. So if you're playing one of those new updated Goliaths, yes, you have cold resistance, which also gives you a +5 modifier to your frost check. Basically, I have 3 different tiers of clothing that add +5, +10, and +15 that get more and more expensive to be able to wear on your body. And I also have a set of 3 different consumables that all add +5 to your frost check, but one of them only lasts for an hour, a day, and a week. And if you can find an enchanter that knows how to do the warmth enchant or find one of those rings, you're in good shape too. So in the big picture here, the environment's out to get you with a frost check DC that keeps on rising, but you can prepare for it by equipping yourself with cold weather gear in a lot of different ways to be able to increase your frost check modifier. Combat the cold. And if you're so prepared that your frost check modifier is actually higher than the frost check DC, you don't even have to make the roll. Because again, compared to rules as written, that seems crazy to just be able to wear a 10 gold jacket and be immune to the check. Time out. If y'all are liking what you see here in this PDF or any of the stuff I have here on this channel, then I have a huge announcement. We just hit our next big goal over on Patreon, and starting next month, I'll be releasing monthly Patreon-only PDFs. I'm going to be giving this full PDF to anyone who's a patron of mine during the month of October. And in the months following, I'll have multiple different reward tiers to give access to more and more homebrew content. And the stuff I put on it is voted on by you guys. I'm talking magic items, mini dungeons, custom class features for all classes, subclasses, rule systems, and much more. All of this is happening at the end of this month, which is huge because that's when I'm changing and upgrading all the Patreon reward tiers. That's when the channel's 1-year anniversary is, and it might just be our 10,000 subscriber threshold goal we hit. And it's my birthday. Back to the homebrew. We're diving further into survival now with my homebrew house rules for death. I've already done a full video on all my death saving throw homebrews, and the link for that will be down in the description. I go over multiple different ways to increase the threat of death in your game. I even have a really cool rule from Pathfinder 2nd edition that I changed and modified and adapted to D&D 5th edition. So if you want more death options, you can check out that video. But the one rule that I did not put in that video, it was literally out of all the 7 rules, it was the 8th rule, and I really should have put it in there because it's awesome and it fits perfectly into this Icewind Dale theme. I call this variant rule Exhausted Death Saves. Anytime a character is taken to 0 hit points and knocked unconscious, whenever they return back to consciousness, they automatically gain 1 level of exhaustion. Because one of the dumbest things about death saves is this whole whack-a-mole thing when you keep standing back up and you're totally fine somehow. I really like this here because exhaustion in general is a very underused mechanic because a lot of people either use it wrong and just kill your players because it's too much, or never use it at all. In this Icewind Dale homebrew, I really tried to hit it perfectly down the middle with multiple different ways to gain exhaustion, this being one of them. But don't worry, I also add multiple ways to lose exhaustion. And again, if you guys want to see more videos on different parts of this homebrew, you gotta let me know, because I have an entire rest system with different rest rolls that you can do while resting to try and survive out there. You can hide and protect your shelter, you can forage, you can cook, you can keep watch. But one of the things you can do is bundle up and try and drop 2 levels of exhaustion during a long rest. And if it were me, this is also where I'd step into some homebrew spells to let my healer type characters feel even more special with some sort of exhaustion reduction spells. Halftime show. Huh? I want to show you all of these homebrews in full videos so I can show you everything that I've been working on since Icewind Dale's release. So if this video gets over 800 likes in the next 4 days, I'll do a follow-up video based on whatever you ask for down in the comments. Make sure you stick around the end when I fly through all 50 of these. Okay, now we're getting into what a lot of y'all have asked me about, our avalanches. Rules as written avalanches. Let me find those 2 pages. Basically, you roll initiative against this avalanche and it starts a certain distance away and then travels towards you as you run away from it. Or you make a strength saving throw to get buried. So you're basically in combat against snow as it chases you down. I'm assuming the gameplay of this would look like a bunch of dash actions and long striders. Not cinematic at all. Okay, so if you know me and the channel at all by now, you can probably see where I'm going to be going with these avalanches. I'm talking skill challenges. Now, I've already done 3 different videos on skill challenges. One being a base skill challenge video, another one being an extension of that. But then this is what I'm talking about of a 1-round skill challenge. All those will be down in the description, and in each one of those, I tell a story and give a literal example of how the thing works. What I do in the PDF is I give you guys 6 different ways that you could actually run avalanches or any other weird environmental challenge you want to throw at your players. But for me, I would choose that 1-round skill challenge, and here's how it goes. Each of the players that's about to get buried by snow would have 1 chance to make 1 skill check. It would be up to them to creatively describe what kind of thing they're trying to do that best suits their character to get away from this thing, or also help their allies get away from this thing. One really important rule for any type of skill challenges is once one player makes a check of some kind, no one's allowed to use that check for an entire round. So if somebody makes an athletics check the first round, not only could nobody else make an athletics check, the following round, athletics is now off the table. But for 1-round skill challenges, it's real simple because everybody only gets 1 check. There's a skill challenge DC that I set, and I would track successes and failures. And as a group, they would succeed or fail together. If they have more overall successes, everyone's fine, and I would describe the people who succeeded at saving the ones who didn't. But if that 1-round skill challenge fails, any of those members who failed are now buried in the snow. Which leads me into another bonus homebrew rule that I want to give you guys about what happens if you get buried in the snow. First of all, you take 2d10 cold damage and you make a frost check. And now from the perspective of the person buried in the snow, this is what happens to them. I took inspiration here from death saving throws because it's very symbolic of what's happening here. They're trying to climb out of the snow to unbury themselves. In this case, every round would be 1 minute, and at the end of every minute, they would make a frost check. As soon as they succeed on 3 frost checks, they're able to pull themselves back to the surface. But every failed frost check gives them another level of exhaustion, and eventually it's going to get to the point where they're rolling with disadvantage, and then death. But don't worry, they're not alone. What about all their allies up on the surface? They have a chance to save them. Now, if you've seen a lot of my stuff, you'll start to notice that a lot of my videos are tying together now because I've already done a whole video on my homebrew DC methods. You can check all those out in that video, and I have all of these in the PDF as well. So all the players at the surface would be in a race to try and succeed at a checkpoint DC. I've also called these a depreciation DC, but basically it's a DC that starts off very high. Let's say DC 20. All the party members can say who goes first and what they're trying to do and what creative skill check they want to do to try and find their friend. But as soon as one person succeeds at this find your friend DC 20, the DC then drops to 15. Now the next player describes what they do, but again, it has to be a different skill. Their DC is only 15, and once they succeed, it drops to 10. And as soon as someone succeeds at a DC 10, they pull their friend out. But all of this is happening while their friend's making those frost checks. But I want to encourage you as the DM to change all these knobs that I'm giving you. I'm trying to give you blank slate creative ideas that you can tweak for yourself. Maybe you have the person buried underground make a frost check after every single one of the players' checks. Or maybe you start at a DC 20 and it only goes down by 2 each time. How cruel do you want to be? The last homebrew I want to share with you guys before I literally do a fly through of all of these things to let you get a little sneak peek of what's going on here. It's called the Dice Tower of Doom.
Dice Tower of Doom.
The feeling of horror in D&D is a little bit harder to pull off, which is why I've also made a video for you guys on horror that I did a few weeks ago. See guys, I really got you covered. But that video talks about more of the description and feel of horror. I want to give you some mechanics. How I normally start this off as a DM and then my players know something's coming is I get one large D6. I'm talking like a big huge one, and I put it in the center of the table. This is the base of the tower. From this point on, anytime certain checks are failed, and this is up to you as the DM of what these things are and what circumstance you're building, because what this is tension. These dice represent tension. Whenever something fails or goes wrong, the tension is building, and so will this dice tower. Let's just say, for example, you're in a white dragon's lair that's sleeping. At the level you're at, if this thing wakes up, you'd be screwed. So your mission is to get in there, get the quest item, and get out. As a DM, you'd have to first figure out what type of triggers would cause players to add dice to this tower. Failed stealth checks, combat that breaks out, or any number of things could add more and more dice. So literally around the table, your players will be building this dice tower dice by dice as it gets more and more unstable, as the tension rises. And before you start this thing, you gotta let your players know, if this dice tower falls, something awful will happen. Maybe you just straight up tell them what will happen, but I like to let them think it out for themselves. You'll literally see your players get nervous at the table to bump it, or if somebody rolls dice that gets real close to it, anything that causes that thing to fall triggers the effect. So this homebrew is a little meta, but a lot of fun, and the one downside is that you can't do this online. So don't worry, I got you covered still. In that PDF, I have multiple other systems that also increase the horror. It's a tension die system that I got inspiration from the Angry GM on and really made it my own and ran with it. Instead of building dice into a tower, you put dice into a bowl, and then something triggers to make you roll all the dice in the bowl. Any one that is rolled causes the effect. That's just the quick version of it, but there's a ton of different applications that I go over as well. Now we're going into overtime with a rapid flyby of all these homebrews. Because again, this video would literally be like 5 hours long if I went through every single one of these, but I want to know what you guys want to see, and if this video does well, we'll see what happens. I homebrewed some frosty status effects of hypothermia and frostbite. Homebrew item durability system that also affects your frost check modifier gear. And as your items get worn down, you gotta keep making sure to repair them. And this is again, that feeling of getting worn down. You gotta repair these things to keep them fresh. Frozen effects on magic items where certain magic items might go dormant if they become frozen and you have to be able to undo it. How ruthless. One of my favorites is the day and darkness system, because in Icewind Dale, the rime is over everybody and everything's really dark and stuff, and there's a very small window of daylight. I take all the dawn, day, dusk, and darkness cycles and really streamline them, combine it with rest systems and travel systems to break it all apart to make it really easy to run. For environmental stuff, I got frigid water effects, cracked ice effects, how that works. I got 5 different storm categories starting from fog, then wind, then a snowstorm, then a hailstorm, and then finally a blizzard. And there's some really cool stuff about the different effects in a blizzard and fighting in a blizzard and potentially getting lost and separated from your party in a blizzard. We already talked about Death Homebrews, and the travel system in this thing I spent so much time on to really feel good about travel. I already did a full video on travel. We also have an encounter system that I absolutely love, and this PDF has over 14 different roll tables in it. Tips and tricks on how to calculate distances and use Arctic animal companions. They have sled dogs and axe beaks, but I kind of tweak some of the numbers around to kind of make each different animal have their own place to shine, because right now dogs just seem really lame. And I mean dogs like the mechanics in the game, not in real life. Like I have a dog, I love her. Like, you get it. Because I also added polar bears to this thing to be able to trudge through the snow with. And finally, there's 2 more roll tables on extreme cold and how it can affect your physical body over time and your mentality over time. Certain things happen to your body that just start to ache and you gotta go back to town to heal up. Or certain things happen to your psyche, which gives players more role play things to help them role play in this fear. Whew, I really tried to condense it all down. And if you like the ideas I'm giving you guys, think about joining my Patreon and give you guys even more. Guys, I hope you're as excited as I am to be able to put these homebrews into use at your table. The majority of these were brand new homebrews I put together just for this. This thing took a ton of time and honestly pushed me to my limits, but I absolutely loved making it. And a little secret is this PDF is actually a test run for me, because depending on how well this goes, I may just have a Dungeon Coach Homebrew Playbook Kickstarter in the works. So thank you again to my patrons, the Dungeon Company, and of course the Dungeon Crew. I hope you enjoyed that free gift. So until next time, stay warm, stay creative, and think outside that box. Peace.